Now let's get started. Everybody hear me okay? Thank you, Mike. Rabbi Heva asked me for a title to this lecture. And he rejected it. He wouldn't print it. And the title was, how's it possible for me to offend everyone in the room equally? Our Chachamim tell us that 5 things happened on Tish'a BeAb. The first one was the Meraglim in the desert. The spies brought back the bad report. The 2 Batei Mikdash were destroyed on the same day, several hundred years apart. Bar Kochvaz defeat in the year 132. And of course, that they plowed the fields around Yerushalayim with salt so that nothing would ever grow again, that this capital would be completely decimated. You can add 2 more to the list after the Mishnah. The Alhambra decree was put into effect. That was the expulsion from Spain. It happened on Tish'a BeAb 1492. And World War I also began on Tish'a BeAb in 1914. World War I, of course, really is just the beginning of World War II, actually. That long conflict in the 20th century began on Tish'a BeAb. Very interesting little footnotes. I've heard this question asked a couple of times in the few lectures that I attended. Why are we mourning? What's the purpose? And people sit and they lament the Beit HaMikdash being destroyed. I once heard a rabbi ask an interesting question on Tish'a BeAb. He said, are we really crying about a building? Could you cry about a building that was destroyed? Can you sit on the floor and rip your clothes and actually feel bad about a brick and mortar structure that was destroyed? And his answer was, no, of course we can't. If we look at the building itself, it was problematic from the get-go for the Jewish people. The Beit HaMikdash never brought us anything positive. When David tries to build it, God tells him, no, your son's going to build it. Once Shlomo builds it, the night after he builds it, in Sefer Melachim, Shlomo has his second dream. The second dream that he has, God tells him, okay, you built this house, very nice. The stakes have now been raised. Everyone's watching now. I can't be so slipshod with you. We've entered a high-stakes poker game. And how does Shlomo do? He does very poorly. I'm not judging Shlomo HaMelech. Sefer Melachim does. Chapter 11. The Book of Kings is something they usually skip in school. It talks about how rampant Avodah Zarah became in Yerushalayim. When you read further in the Book of Kings, when Yoshiyahu HaMelech does Teshuvah, they pull out the cult prostitutes from the temple. They destroy the stables that held horses that were there for the worship of the sun god. So the Beit HaMikdash was not this idyllic place of worship and peace and love. It was not. Ever. First couple of days. That was it. Then it's destroyed. Second Beit HaMikdash, how did we do there? We did lousy. The Kehunah was sold. It was corrupt. It was a focal point of corruption. And God wiped it out again. So I return to the question, what are we mourning? It's not the building. And in case you still think it is, Yirmiyahu HaNabi told us it's not the building. That famous pasuk, Echal Hashem, Echal Hashem, Echal Hashem Hema. The Jewish people come to the Navi and they tell him, God can never destroy his temple. It's his signature on the building here. He'll never destroy it. Yirmiyahu tells them, you think God cares about this. He will wipe it off like cleaning off a dinner plate. It means nothing. And indeed, God does. Clean it off like a dinner plate. So it's not the building. I want to suggest something else. I know it's 3:30 in the afternoon. Caffeine headaches are just about kicking in. Everyone's getting a little fuzzy. From the time we're little kids, we're all taught that Chazal that says that every nation has its own representative in Shamayim. Every nation has its Sa, right? God has this table. He sits down. Norway has a representative. The Finns, the Americans, the Mexicans, everyone's sitting at the table. Okay, it's very nice for a 6-year-old to imagine. But what does it really mean? That God has this court and there's a representative for every people. It means that every nation has a unique characteristic. Every people that can be called a people has its own representation, has its own unique taste and feel. There's another Gemara, a very strange midrash in Yoma on Daf 77a. And the midrash tells us how the Malach of Israel was subordinated to the Malach of Greece and to the Malach of Persia. This midrash tells us something very fascinating. That Israel, we have a relationship with God. When we're living in the land of Israel, we have a unique and special relationship. It's in this week's parasha. Umi goy gadol, first pasuk from Abi, Asher lo Elohim, k'Adonai Elohim v'chol koreinu elav. Who else has that relationship? That we have a great God, a true God, that we turn to that God, and God responds and answers us. And the answer is nobody. The other nations have their representatives at the table, but they don't have a direct line. We have a direct line. We had a direct line to God. This midrash in Yoma tells us we no longer have that. That we have a Sar now, like everybody else, and that representative of the Jewish people can be subordinated to the other people at the table. We have a seat, we have no direct line anymore. And how does that manifest itself? In a myriad of ways. Look, Jewish people, we don't have anything unique about us really, culturally. Everything we have is something adopted from the Goyim. Our Pizmonim, I love our Pizmonim. They're Islamic love songs that we've Judaized. I bet there's not a person in this room who doesn't hear White Christmas and sing along with it. We all know the Christmas carols, we all hear them. That's because we're living under that song, that representative. We have to pick up stuff. And we do. And what we do with it is up to us, but we definitely pick up from our host countries, from our host angels. We're definitely influenced. Am I being recorded? Am I being recorded?
Yes, officially.
Can we shut that off? Okay.
Sorry.
We're still going to play it. What I'd like to focus on is a certain aspect of influence that we have certainly picked up. Jewish history is very interesting when we look at it through the eyes of the Nevi'im. The Nevi'im looked at what happens to the Jewish people as a complete cause and effect. You keep the Torah, God's good. You don't keep the Torah, bad stuff's going to happen. And we see this playing out all through the books of our Tanakh. From Yehoshua to Shoftim to Shemuel to Melachim, it's just 850 years of this ping pong game between God and the Jewish people. We have a mission. The minute we veer off the road, God slaps us back into place with a Nabi. That's the only purpose of Nevi'im, not to tell the future. They're not crystal ball genies. Nevi'im are people that set us back on the right path, that show us where we're going wrong. And they did this for 850 years, screaming at us about what we were doing wrong. That was the purpose of the Nevi'im. But that was the pattern of Jewish history. Our view of geopolitics was not that the king of Ammon was getting powerful and we were just in his way, or that Sanheriv destroyed Israel because the Assyrians were on the ascent, or the Babylonians destroyed Yerushalayim because Babel was on their way to more world conquest. No. The reason why we suffered was because of our sins, nothing else. Geopolitics is merely the outcome of our actions. Not because this or that happened, it's what we did that triggered the events. And that's the Jewish view of history. That is not the view of the Goyim at all. Since history was being recorded, we look at the Greeks and the Romans, and their philosophy of history is certainly not the Jewish one. From Herodotus to Polybius, the whole gamut, they all looked at history as something very cyclical. Society passes through identical patterns, they develop, and periodically the whole thing just repeats itself. You have this almost inflexible destiny that you're tied to, that you have to be part of. You're just floating along. There's generation, and there's degeneration. There's a bunch of people get together, they have success, they have a king, they have a government, they have an empire, the empire falls. A new empire starts. This is how the Greeks looked at history. Not the Jewish way at all. When we left Eretz Israel, when we left that kingdom of God, we were now playing in their ballpark. We were playing by their rules. We were floating on their river. And how do we do? How do we do in those cycles? Well, after the year 70, or 68, I guess, if you go by that count. I don't know which one you accept. But after the year 70, the Jews were dispersed. When Yerushalayim is no longer the center, there's a few different exiles inside Eretz Israel until finally the country was almost bereft of Jews. It never was completely, ever. But the Jews are scattered literally to four corners of the earth. And we ended up living under the auspices of the two great, let's call them empires or religions, Christianity and later on Islam. And how did we do? What was our experience living with the Goyim and under their rules, drifting on their river? How did we do? Let's first look at Islam. Islam, Muhammad began, the Islamic calendar begins in the year 622. So before that, we'd have to do the Christians, but I want to do the Islamists first because it's a little simpler. Under Islam, we have a few examples. Shemuel HaNagid was the poet, statesman. He composed poetry actually going into battle, fighting for the Muslims against the Christian armies in Europe. He got to a level where the king had sent him out to negotiate. The caliph sent him out negotiating for him. Shemuel HaNagid had incredible power, but he never held a title. Because if he held a title, there would be rumblings. Why would a Jew hold a title? So the caliph never gave him a title, and he never had one. But he enjoyed great success and great wealth in his lifetime. His son, a little known fact, his son's name was Yehosef. Yehosef, scholars believe, built the Alhambra Palace, which is a tourist attraction today in Granada. They were so jealous of him that it touched off a riot in 1066, where 100,000 Jews were slaughtered in the city of Granada under the Muslims. Of course, we know all Spanish life ended, as we mentioned before, Tish'a BeAb of 1492, and then the Portuguese Jewish life, 1497, but that was already when they were Christian. We have the Jews of Yemen that suffered for hundreds of years. Basic rule to kind of work with Islam: when the fanatics take over, we suffer. When the moderates are in power, everybody does business, everybody's happy. Harambam was forced to flee because of the Al-Mu'ahid in the year 1148. They were radical Muslims that came from Africa to the Iberian Peninsula, and the golden age of Spain was over, just like that. One small group that nobody really speaks about is the Surgun. Surgun is a Turkish word. It means exiles. In 1453, when the Turks conquered Constantinople, it was the last stronghold of Byzantium. It was the last hold of the Eastern Roman Empire. The walls fell, and the Sultan took over the biggest city on earth. Istanbul had a population of 450,000 Christians. Just to give you a comparative, at the time London had 15,000 people, Paris had 20,000. The city of Constantinople had close to 500,000 people. Now the Sultan won this great victory, but the problem was he had 500,000 Christians under him now. What was he going to do with them? So what he did was, he bussed people in from other parts of the empire. He forced almost 100,000 Jews that lived in Saloniki, in Rhodes, in Corfu, in other cities of the Ottoman Empire, and he forced them to live in Istanbul for 3 dorot. They were not allowed to leave. This is called the Surgun. He had almost 100,000. That's how most of the Jews that, the Istanbuli Jews ended up there. They were remnants of 1453. They weren't allowed to leave. When we turn our cameras to the Christian world, of course it's much more depraved. A lot more depraved. The early church fathers are filled with anti-Semitic rhetoric. In the 7th century, when the Visigoths in Spain were converted to Christianity, they took their Catholicism very seriously. And anyone who was an infidel had to be persecuted or destroyed. And they were very, very strong about that. Agabon, in the year 840, as early as 840, of terrible writing against the Jews. And of course, it all builds to the Crusades, the shining star of the Christian Middle Ages. Pope Urban II, 1095, in France, declares a holy crusade to liberate the Holy Land from infidels, meaning the Muslims. And so he launches a crusade, and he tells all the holy Christian warriors who come with him that all their debts would be absolved. Who did they owe money to, of course? Jewish moneylenders. And they would get to kill infidels. Some brilliant German guy said, wait a minute, why are we going all the way there to kill infidels? We have them right here at home. And so began a almost 200-year-long period of random Jewish slaughter. The First Crusade, the Second Crusade, the Third Crusade was led by Richard the Lionhearted, the great hero of England. On the day he declared the crusade, there were Jewish pogroms in London, in Sussex, and in 8 more English cities. Tens of thousands of people died in one day. A whole new genre of literature pops up in Judaism. Scholars call it the Akedah literature. We all know Akedah Yitzhak, right? Yitzhak doesn't die. Abraham Avinu stops, doesn't kill him. The Jews of Ashkenaz developed a literature where he does die, where Yitzhak is killed and then reborn. Why would they develop such a thing? It's so strange. Rabbi Faur, in his book, actually, in the introduction to the Gospel according to the Jews, says something fascinating. He says, we're the only people that ever got to write our history as being in the seat of the vanquished. You only hear histories written by the victors, right? You don't hear about the people the Mongols killed. You hear about the glory of Genghis Khan. You never hear about the poor village he overran and the mother who lost her kids that day. The Jews are the only people on the earth that get to write their vanquished history. And not only do we write it, but we relish it. We celebrate it. We have poems about it. We have Rabbi Yitzhak Meshulam writing about how he kills his own children as the Christian mobs are coming into the city to convert the infidel. They had special knives in their kitchen, ready to kill their children. And they did. We alone do this. No other people. We don't have a rebuild Rome day. We don't have, Constantinople fell today. Nobody mourns great cities that fell. We're the only ones that mourn our capital. And again, I ask the question, what are we mourning? And the list just goes on and on. One other wonderful thing that they did in Christendom was expulsions. That was a lot of fun. They decided one day, we don't want the Jews here anymore. And they throw them out. It was merely an excuse to loot them. I have a list of 10 of them. Philip Augustus, 1182, expels the Jews of France. 1198, he recalls them. What did he do? He confiscated all of their goods they couldn't carry with them. That's why Jews stopped farming or stopped doing anything else they couldn't do portable. That's why they in the jewelry business. It's very portable. Stuff a bunch of diamonds in your pocket when they're chasing you. But what he did was, Philip Augustus, he annulled all debts. And he said, if you want to get out of your debt, pay me 20% of what you owe the Jew. So it was a money-raising, and the whole thing was money-raising. Philip the Fair, another wonderful Frenchman. Tish'a BeAb in 1306. 100,000 Jews are expelled again from France. It goes on and on and on. We have these cycles, just like the Greeks said they would be. The Jews come to a place, they learn the language. First generation's a little skittish. Second generation, the kids learn how to do business. Third generation, they're making money. Fourth generation, they're in palaces. Fifth generation, they're on the road again. It happens again and again and again and again and again. They also had wonderful little rituals they used to perform on the Jewish people. An auto de fe. Auto de fe's were simply where they arrested Yehudim that had converted already. And they didn't trust their conversions. They would bring them out and burn them at the stake in public as they signed confessions. We have those. We have detailed confessions today. And they would do it on the king's birthday or whatever country they were in, or on Christmas or on New Year's or on Easter, and burn 100, 150 Jews. The last one to be done was actually in Mexico City in 1862. It's not so long ago. Blood libels were another beauty. First one was 1171. The last one, 1911 in Russia. Blood libels, Jewish, you all know what it is. They're killing Jewish kids. The Jews are killing Christian kids to get their blood to use them to make matzot. How stupid does it sound? But how many people died because of that? Desecration of the host. That's actually my favorite one because it's so ridiculous. In the 13th century, the Christians began to do something that actually the popes and the higher clergy were very against. It's called transubstantiation. Every Sunday in Brooklyn, every Catholic church, they give out wafers and wine to the people that are celebrating Mass. What are they doing? They're ingesting the blood and the body of JC. That's their ritual. The popes, when this came out, said, this is Avodah Zarah. Stop. The people didn't. Okay, by the 13th century, the 14th century, it was already ritual. It was already, the popes couldn't do anything about it. So they celebrated it as well. Mass became something all Catholics did. But they had a little nice twist to it, just to include the Jews. We couldn't be left out. They said that the Jews believed that this ritual was true. And Jews in their home, in the privacy of their homes, were taking crackers, taking the wafers, and stabbing it on tables. Because they knew it really was the body of Jesus. Right. Now, it's almost laughable that they would open a guy's door, throw some cookies on the floor, and kill the family. But they did this for hundreds and hundreds of years. Black Death. The Black Death was responsible for 1/3 of humanity being wiped out. Who they blame? Who else? The Jews for poisoning wells. It just never stopped. Talmud burnings. Let's get together and burn their books. Paris, 1248. Munich, 1334. Aragon, 1263. Sicily, 1270. Rome, 1553. There's 20 more. They just went into people's homes, took their libraries, and brought them into the street and burned them because our books were offensive. One of my favorite anti-Semites of all time was, of course, Voltaire. Voltaire was the father of the French Revolution. He was the father of our modern concept of freedom. He died, of course, before the revolution took place, 2 years before. But he was a virulent anti-Semite. I want to read you a small paragraph. There's 100 of them. This one, had to read it. So again, Voltaire. Why are the Jews hated? It is the inevitable result of their laws. They either must conquer everyone or be hated by the whole human race. Jews are an ignorant and barbarous people who, for a long time, have joined the most sordid avarice to the most detestable superstition and to the most invincible hatred of all peoples. Amazing. Because Voltaire was so vicious in his hatred against the Jews, many people feel that the emancipation that came with the revolution, and right afterwards with Napoleon, how they emancipated the Jews, was a product of Voltaire. So it was like almost, it was a thumb in his eye. But the truth is that Voltaire was actually the father of modern anti-Semitism. Because he said the Jews are so totally and completely detestable, and there was no way to bring them back, no way to redeem them, he was the father of modern Darwinist anti-Semitism, which of course the Germans used. Everything the Germans used, they learned from the French. Don't think the Germans are the worst. The French taught them what they know. If we look at it carefully, we've been on the railroad tracks to Auschwitz since the year 70. It's been a slow ride, but we did get there. And that's why the Germans called it the final solution. We've been dealing with these people for a very long time. And now it's time to end it. And they came very close. They came really close to doing it. And they did it in the most humane way we've ever been treated. There was no expulsion. Just bring them to a pit and shoot them. It's so easy. And then finally detach, put them in a room, gas them, and burn the bodies. We finally realized what we should do with these people. It's over. The course of Jewish history took an incredibly unprecedented turn in 1948. We got a state. Now, for a person my age, I was born in 1963. Israel was a fact of life from the time that I was born. It wasn't a gift, it was Israel. My father was one of the first ones to do bar mitzvah trip. Okay, everyone goes there. We go on bar mitzvah trips. That's what Israel is. It's there, it's a fact of life. There's an attack, there's a war, we always come out of it. We always get saved. It's a fact. But if you would tell a person sitting in Auschwitz in 1945, guess what? In 3 years, see those guards? They're all going to be on trial or hanged at Nuremberg. You're going to have a country. You're going to have a gun, and you're going to defend yourself successfully and start a nation. They would have asked you what it is that you were smoking. It was not even a thought in the mind of men. Certainly not in the mind of the Jewish people. But it did happen. In 1948, for the first time, the Jews had sovereignty in the land that they're going to refer to as Palestine. By the way, that name was given to it by the Romans just to give us. No, it was the Romans. Called it Palestina. They removed the name of Judea and called it Palestina, even though Pelishtim had not been there for 1,000 years. They knew they were our enemies from our writings and decided to call it Palestina just to give us, to tweak us. When you think about it, that the Jews have sovereignty in their own land. There's a Jewish army. I remember when we were kids, Entebbe was like this incredible thing. A bunch of Jews are brought to Africa, right? And they're saved. We had one casualty. This is crazy. We wiped out every terrorist that was there. We took them back on a plane and brought them to Israel. What kind of pride did people feel? What kind of pride did people feel after the 6-day war? But my Rabbi Ezra was bringing me once. We were walking up that road along up to Jaffa Gate. And he said, you can't imagine what it was like that day of Shavuot. We all came to pray at the Kotel for the first time since 1948. And there were bodies, littered bodies of Jordanians all around. We were stepping over their bodies to go to the Kotel. He goes, Mashiach had come. We got Shechem, we got Hebron, we got Yerushalayim. It was back. There was a euphoria, and there should be euphoria. What I'm pointing out to you is that we're no longer on their river. We're no longer subject to Agabard, to Philip Augustus, to Pope Urban II, to Heinrich Himmler, to Adolf Hitler. We're subject to God. What we lost in the year 70 was that connection. We got it back. It's not exactly the way Sefer Devarim or Yirmiyahu had experienced it, but we are certainly not on that river, on that road that our Christian or Muslim overlords want us to be on. And this bothers them to no end. Oh, this really annoys them. My son, a couple weeks ago, was invited to the United Nations to a closed meeting of the Security Council. He went to the meeting, and he said for 2 straight hours, all they did was bash Israel. All the nations of the world were in the room. What was the one thing they talked about? The Palestinian harassment at the checkpoints in Israel. That they spend too much time, these poor Palestinians coming in, they're checking their papers. And this is true. He said 5 minutes in the meeting. He said 5 minutes of the meeting. The last 5 were dedicated to the Syrian crisis. 500. The number they announced at the meeting was 600,000 dead. 600. Syria is a tiny country. 600,000 dead and 3 million refugees. Chairman, we vote to couch the motion and to discuss it at a later time. The vote is... They were talking about Palestinians being harassed at checkpoints, and 600,000 dead meant nothing to the people sitting in that room. The Jews having sovereignty was a major problem. It was a major, major problem for every single person sitting in that room. The miracles that occurred in the last 100 years, from the Balfour Declaration to the Six-Day War to the Scud missiles. One Scud hit the army barracks in Saudi Arabia, the U.S. Army barracks. They killed 70 soldiers. 39 Scuds hit Tel Aviv. 1 death. It's just uncanny. We're moving back to that closeness with God. We're coming back to it. What can we take away from today? I heard a lot of nice inspirational speeches inside. A lot of people coming right up to the point, but nobody offending you by saying it. I'm sorry, and I apologize to everybody in the room, but I would like to offend you and myself. When we look around, the college campuses of the United States have become absolute hotbeds of anti-Semitism. They have dropped this ruse of BDS, although it's still very much in force. Last week there was an item in the Wall Street Journal how they forced, I think it was the University of Michigan, to take away a sabra hummus from the cafeteria. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Take away hummus. No. Oh, yeah. Look at their reactions. Oh, yeah. Now wait a minute. Sabra isn't even made in the West Bank. So it's complete and total nonsense. It is anti-Semitism. You can call it anything you want, but it's there. And it's now at a point where we're feeling it and tasting it. And these kids today that are lying down to Palestinians and doing die-ins in Brooklyn College, you know what a die-in is? And they paint it red as if they're dead people, and they just lay on campus to illustrate what the Israelis are doing. And there's a lot of Yehudim lying down with these kids too. A lot of Yehudim participating because we're Jewish, we have values, and human rights is a Jewish value. The only thing that exceeds their ignorance is their chutzpah. These kids will be the legislators 10 years from now. If we're not afraid, we should be. How do we act? What are we supposed to do? Should we just ignore it as if it's not happening, as if nothing is happening? You can't. Jews ignore things to their peril. You ignore it, it's like a bad tooth. It doesn't go away. It gets worse and it festers and it infects the jaw. We're watching it happen. And what is the answer? What is the answer? I say with optimism, and I say the next word I'm going to say with some pain, because it's very close to home for me, and because we're so comfortable. Because you can go to King's Highway and get anything you want. You can get bamba in 3 different flavors now. You don't have to be in Israel to get bamba anymore. You don't have to be anywhere. You can get anything you want on King's Highway. But what you can't get is that relationship with God. You can't walk out of your house and you can't see the valley where David and Goliath fought. You can hear about it. You can't see the Bet HaMikdash. You can't see the Kotel. You can't see the city of Yerushalayim. And it is no longer desolate and without its children. It is a thriving, bustling metropolis with trains and streetlights and signs and a sewage system and batei knesiyot and people learning more Torah today than at any time in Jewish history. Any time. Do we ignore this? We are. We are. I'll leave you with one thought. Every one of us in this room, every one of us, and I include myself on the top of the list as guilty, should think about how we're moving to Israel. I said it. Oh. Look at that. Nobody says it. We should support them. Let's go there. Let's that. Yeah, it's all important. Blah, blah, blah. Move. Save yourselves. Save your children. Save your grandchildren while you can. Because they don't always give us that option to get out. Matter of fact, they almost never give us that option. Move. This Tish'a BeAb, think in your mind that next year you'll be in Tish'a BeAb in Yerushalayim fasting, but Yani.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.